Buddy, this is officially the 7th education session of Heartland Summer, so thank you for joining us. My name is Larry Law. I'm the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Independent Booksellers Association. As always, I am joined by Carrie Obrey, the Executive Director of the Midwest Independent Booksellers Association, and Kate Scott, the Operations Manager for MIVA. Like all of our previous sessions, this session will be recorded today and available to everybody this Friday on heartlandfallforum.org. Before we start, I want to quickly run through what the rest of our week looks like. Tomorrow, which is Wednesday, at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern, we have a rep pick session. We'll be joined by, this is an all PRH session. We'll be joined by Random House Adult, Penguin Young Readers, Penguin Adult, Random House Children's Books, and Knopf Doubleday. So that is tomorrow, 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. That will also be recorded. And then Thursday evening, we have a very special event. Kind of a strange time, an evening with Ayed Akhtar, September 24th at 7:30 p.m. Central, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. So please join us for that. Links to that are found on heartlandfallforum.org. I think Carrie just threw the registration into the chat, so thank you for that. And I also wanted to mention, we have similar to our Al Sharpton event, I think it was it last week we have another joint regional event coming up on Wednesday, October 14th. We're very excited about. Ellie Broche will be in conversation with Jenny Lawson for her latest book, Solutions and Other Problems. And that is 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern on October 14th. You can find links to that on both of our regional websites and on heartlandfallforum.org. So lastly, before I kick it over to Danny, I quickly, on behalf of Gleba and MIVA, wanted to congratulate one of our panelists today. $2 Radio has won the 2020 Voice of the Heartland Award. Please join me in congratulating Eric Obenauf.
Woo! Yay, Eric.
Woohoo!
Congratulations, Eric.
Right, now I'm going to get this rolling. Today I'm going to turn it over to Danny Caine. He's the host and moderator for today's event. Danny Caine is the owner of Raven Bookstore in Lawrence, Kansas, and the recipient of the 2019 Midwest Bookseller of the Year Award. He's the author of the book How to Resist Amazon and Why from Microcosm Publishing, the poetry collections Continental Breakfast from Mason Jar Press, Eldorado Freddy's from Belt Publishing, and Flavor Town from Harpoon Books. You know him, you love him, Danny Caine.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Really excited about this one. I think this is going to be a really interesting panel. I hope through communicating between booksellers and publishers, we can work to demystify the supply chain a little bit and maybe develop some strategies, if not strategies, at least a little bit of understanding about what we're all facing as publishers and as booksellers as we enter both the most crucial and strangest fourth quarter of our bookselling lives. Really quick, I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm so happy these folks have joined us to talk about an at times challenging topic. First, we have Karen Torres. Karen is the VP Director of Field Sales and Account Marketing at Hachette Book Group USA, which includes adult and children's books as well as gift books and religious books. Hi, Karen. Thank you for being here. Jana Demkevich is the marketing director at Minneapolis's Milkweed Editions and former publicist for the press. For 5 years, she co-ran a print and digital magazine, The Riveter, which published long-form journalism written by women and non-binary folks. A graduate of the University of Missouri Journalism School, she has worked as a researcher and editor for the Sager Group's Women in Journalism Anthology series, and her writing can be found in Nylon, Guernica, Literary Hub, and the Los Angeles Review. Hi, Jana. Thanks for being here. Anne Trubek is the founder and publisher of Cleveland-based Belt Publishing. Her new book, So You Want to Publish a Book, and her must-read email newsletter, Notes from a Small Press, offer candid looks into issues like the ones we're discussing today. And reading that newsletter, I think, inspired this panel a little bit. Really subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Hi, Anne. Thanks for being here.
Hey.
And Eric Obenauf is co-founder and editorial director of $2 Radio, a Columbus, Ohio-based independent publisher and vegan cafe. And as Larry said, $2 Radio is the recipient of the 2020 Voice of the Heartland Award, which is amazing news. That award will be presented at the Heartland Booksellers Award ceremony on October 15th. Hey, Eric, thanks for being here. All right, so as I said, I want to open up at least communication, if not solutions, between publishers and booksellers about a topic that can be at times contentious or challenging, and that is the supply chain in the fourth quarter. Hopefully we'll leave with a bit more understanding about why certain books take longer to show up than others, and perhaps some tips about how to ensure that more must-have books are on our shelves this year. I think we should operate under the assumption today that we all want the same thing. We all want to sell as many books as possible, regardless of demand and supply chain issues, and we want to make sure everything that needs to be in stock is in stock. So I have a couple questions, and I would like to open up a lot of this to Q&A in the chat, which Larry and Carrie are going to help me moderate. But my first question, really simply for the publishers, is even in a typical year, what is one thing that can disrupt the flow of books from publisher to bookstore? I'm going to start with Anne. I know it's a, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a pretty new publisher, so I don't have that many years to come up with typical. The best problem is when there's more demand than there is supply, and you can't get things printed fast enough to get to the stores. So that is, you know, I guess a very typical worry that you would have. It's just, and it's really the same worry. It's can we get the books to the stores? And then how you do that, you know, what are the different things that you do, and how this year it's more complicated in terms of printer turnaround time, and supply chain issues with getting from the distributor to the stores is just more complex. But there are others here who have so much more experience. We should hear from them.
Sure. Okay. And my next question is about why this year is different. So we will return to that in just a second. Karen, what's one thing that even in a typical year can disrupt the flow of books from publisher to bookstore? Karen, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I promise you I was talking the entire time. I think, you know, issues affecting this year in particular have more to do with the less physical printing plants that we've read about. And that is in correlation with the importance of data. Really, the best soundbite I can give you is to encourage you to work on reporting your data, place a premium on getting your orders in on time to meet cutoff dates, identify what you know you're going to sell, and order more of that book or books. Encouraging you to be very thorough with your initial orders this fourth quarter. This is not a typical year. What Anne said is true. Everybody has the same printing and delivery issues, but about this year, it's more about reporting and ordering early.
Karen, just in case people haven't read the articles you're referring to, can you really quickly run down what's going on with printing capacity? Again, the short answer there is there was once a time and a place when there were plenty of printing places, and so publishers work with different publishing, with different printing locations to have their books produced and delivered to their warehouses in time to deliver to the bookstores and all of the accounts. And that has shrunken over the years quite considerably. And this year makes that issue bigger because this past spring, summer, many of the publishers moved many of their top books to the fourth quarter, not to mention the seasons they were already planned for with big books in the fourth quarter, which is a typical publishing plan. And so a combination of all those books and very few printing plants will make it difficult. And so the recommendation is, if you order early and get your orders in before the cutoff dates, then you're in alignment to get your books received on time. This is about less reaction time.
So it becomes necessary to work. And one recommendation I have is work with your sales rep.
Karen, thank you. There's a lot of great pointers in there. I will say in the chat, Carrie has posted a very good New York Times article that explains a lot of the printer and supply chain issues from a journalistic standpoint. And thank you to Carrie for posting that. I recommend everybody take a look. All right, Jana, in a typical year even, what kind of thing can disrupt the flow of books from Milkweed Editions to independent bookstores?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of things that can disrupt the flow, honestly, and they, span from micro to macro. One thing we love to do is to use nice paper. We also use recycled paper. So in a typical year, even the availability of paper can cause problems if we're not on top of our shit, if we're not communicating well with our printers. We like to use foil on our covers. We like to make our books as beautiful as possible while also balancing a price point that works well for y'all. So it just takes a lot of coordination and a lot of communication, hitting deadlines on our end of things. And I'm not throwing us under the bus, but I mean, we're people doing all this work, so sometimes communication fails. I also want to say changes so we're distributed through PGW. I know not everyone here is, but so I can talk about the PGW perspective. Changes there just in expectations on metadata, expectations in ship dates and warehouses, et cetera, et cetera. Again, that's kind of like a human error can occur. And so if we don't have a good relationship with our distributor and we're not prioritizing indie accounts and our indie reps and communicating with them well, that can cause delays in the supply chain. Also just, on a human resources level, if we're not training folks well, if we're not empowering them and feeling excited about their, production responsibilities and jobs, that can also cause delays. I didn't know if anyone else would kind of bring up that micro/macro stuff, so I wanted to throw it out there. It's as much about the cultural and systemic issues that we're facing today as it is about in-house, expectations and communication. And also, I don't think I have to bring up Amazon, obviously, but maybe that and I'll just end there. But specifically for Milkweed, indeed paper has, since I've worked at, like Anne, honestly, I'm speaking from a perspective of working here for 5 years. So I don't have, years and years under my belt. But since I've worked at Milkweed, paper has been an issue for us. And that has, caused delays in the past, even before our current reality that we're living in. So hopefully that's
cool. No, that's really, I'm struck by part of the romance of indie book selling is the magic of the book. But at times, especially anticipating a difficult fourth quarter, you really do have to think in terms of commodities sometimes to do this business. It's not all just the kind of magic one-on-one hand selling. You have to think about paper and printing capacity. And I don't know, coming from poetry grad school, indie bookseller, it's a strange thing to try to adapt to, but you got to do it. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's hear from Eric. Eric, thoughts on, even in a typical year, what can disrupt $2 radio books from getting to where they need to be?
Well, I think it was last year there was a paper shortage where typically when we would send the files off to the printer, it would take about 3 weeks to get them back into the warehouse. And very suddenly, without any kind of advance warning, it went from that 3-week period to a little over 4 weeks to even 5 weeks. And a lot of the pub dates are just auto-triggered based on when books arrive in warehouse. So for us, we also work with Publishers Group West, like Jana and Milkweed, and also Anne and Belt. And so, if the books arrive too early, then Amazon, just adjusts the release date. So you're just trying to juggle exactly the exact timing of when books can arrive in the warehouse. And so I remember that paper shortage thing like a year ago really throwing us for a loop. But then also, you know, in terms of process, as soon as we set the publication date for a title, then we coordinate with our printer to get press time. And so we try to schedule things out far enough in advance where the printer has warning and knows about our production schedules coming up. So that typically the turnaround time is like really efficient, and we're able to get books out. We did have a book this summer, you know, so through the warehouse you have where you're able to set notifications based on supply and demand, and so you're able to track certain titles and see if there's, you know, heightened interest in something, and schedule out how far in advance or like how long of a supply of a title you have. And you know, we had a book where we had 3 months supply in warehouse, and then it was a book that was in conversation with sort of the social justice issues of June, and we very quickly like moved through all those books and had to rush in to get another printing immediately. And our printer, we work with a group called Marquee, and they're based in Canada. And a big reason for that is because of the recycled paper options like Jana was talking about. A lot of the printers in the US are, as a small press, you're kind of at the mercy of what papers the big presses want to get their books printed on. And so we've had trouble finding a printer in the US that carries all the recycled paper options that can meet those price points. Yeah, I think that paper shortage, and I think that this year in particular, like everyone has pointed out, with publishers pushing back titles till the fall into the fourth quarter, is pretty tricky for all the printers to be able to make sure everyone's happy and getting the books out.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, Eric, and thank you for all of that. It's interesting to hear people responding to the printing crisis in the United States with printing elsewhere. Like you printing in Canada for the option of recycled paper. There's a very high profile example of an extremely high profile book that's being printed in Germany by the millions and shipped over here. So those are two examples of adaptations, I suppose. I'd like to hear from the publishers, given that 2020 is a year where things are different and things are more challenging. We've talked a lot as booksellers about how we're going to adapt and how we're, like Karen said, order bigger quantities initially, use our data better, work with our sales reps. But I'm curious how the publishers are responding to the coming challenges of the rest of 2020. And we can go in the same order. So let's start with Anne. Anne, what are you doing differently this year? How are you preparing?
Well, you know, as you guys have gotten this general sense, printing turnaround time is really key, and it keeps changing. I mean, I think like what Eric was saying, what happened late last year, that was Michelle Obama's Becoming, which demanded so much of the printers that a lot of us had to get back in line. And that's what was initially, and then there was, I think, another Trump book. But basically, for a couple years, we could assume that it would take 2 to 3 weeks from once we sent it to a printer to get to the warehouse. And then suddenly we had to assume 6 weeks. Then another thing that happened in the spring with COVID is a lot of people moved to POD. And suddenly POD went from 1 to 2 days turnaround to 22 business days turnaround, which is not POD at all. So there's so much anxiety about how we're going to get the books to a printer on time to meet the pub date. And then there's incredible anxiety that I really hope that none of our books do so well that we need a second printing before the end of the year, or a third printing or whatever, because who knows if that's going to happen. So I guess that goes to what Karen was saying, get your orders in early. If we're screwed, then you won't be screwed. I mean, at least you'll have your books if we run out by, you know, November, December. somebody posted on Twitter recently, like everyone's dream is to own an indie bookstore, but could we have some people whose dream is to become printers? And I would love to have some new indie printers. We have found some good small printers. We still all of our printers are in the region. One's in Illinois, one's in Michigan, and we're working with another printer in Baltimore for the first time. So that's a lot of it. We have crashed some titles. We've crashed 2 books about higher ed in the time after COVID or given COVID. So that was one thing that we did to adapt. So we have been doing a lot of very quick turnaround projects, and then just holding our breath, hoping that our printers can come through, and doing smaller initial print runs, because the different kinds of printing processes that printers use, if you do under a certain amount, the turnaround time can be quicker. So more smaller print runs and crashing titles.
Sure. I just one quick follow-up question before we hear from the other publishers. I keep about this like starting a printer thing. We keep hearing that demand for print books is pretty healthy, and even through all this, people are still looking to buy books in print. If that's the case and the demand is there, do you have a sense of why printing capacity is still decreasing so rapidly?
I think there's been consolidation, and I think POD, I mean, so many books are now POD, and POD is all run by Ingram and Amazon. So it's the same story. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Karen.
Hey, Danny, one of the things that's just going on in the industry is that the printers are being careful about how they man their warehouses, and they have to have fewer people in contact with each other, just like you guys do in your stores. And so that's something that's exacerbating the problem right now across the board with all the printers.
Yeah, definitely understandable, and we're glad everybody's playing it safe and keeping those workers healthy. That's David Underwood from Penguin Random House. Thank you for weighing in, David. So back to the subject of strategies for planning the rest of 2020. Karen, can you tell us what Hachette is doing to account for all these question marks?
So at Hachette, we have a dedicated inventory management department, which I'm fairly certain is true of all the top publishers, or top 5, or certainly even more than that. And that group's total job is to oversee the supply chain process. This dedicated group works closely with all the different sales groups to estimate for first prints and reorders. They use sales history data from competitive titles to determine the first printings, and similar practices for recommended reprints. It's not an exact science, but it's the closest thing we have to helping us print and receive the needed books for all of our accounts. Now the question is, who receives these books? Here's the answer. The bookstore that has the order in a timely manner, met the cutoff date, they're likely to not suffer not receiving it because they got their order in.
So yeah, it strikes me. I mean, the business of bookselling has changed so much in the last couple months, and one way is perhaps to change how we look at data. And there's maybe that is one strategy. And again, it's kind of counterintuitive to how a lot of us think about books in general, or the kind of inexact, witchy science of bookselling and recommending. But some of these decisions will have to be made with data in order to get the orders in on time, so we can get the right spot in line to get those books. Thank you for that, Karen. All right, Jana, I know one of Milkweed's big titles for the fall is the reissue of Braiding Sweetgrass, which has a beautiful cover and lots of great design elements. But I look at that, and that's a book that can be challenging to keep in stock at times like this. So not to put you on the spot about that book in particular, but what's Milkweed doing for in terms of strategy?
You froze for a second right after difficult to keep in stock, and I was like,
oh, sorry.
Oh yeah.
We're so excited about that book, and I love books like that. But I know sometimes it having elements like that can lead to difficulties in reprints and etc. So tell us about what Milkweed is doing.
Oh my God, totally, Danny. So we've been working on the Braiding Sweetgrass Special Edition for a longer lead time than our typical title, because we always knew that the selling point, if you will, was getting new content from Robin. We got a new introduction from her, sure, but it's the bookmark ribbon. It's the beautiful stock of the paper. It's the forgive me for forgetting exactly what it's called. Ooh, I could just, maybe I'll grab it and show it to you in a little bit. It's over there. It took so much back and forth with our art director and bids from multiple printers to get to where we wanted to be, because we wanted it to be a price point that was hopefully seemingly accessible to y'all, $35. So, and we wanted to use our recycled paper, which is part of our mission and what we do for every book. So, you know, we were smart about it in the sense that we have been thinking about this for about a year and a half and starting the planning as early as possible. It wasn't a new book, you know, we're reissuing a book we already have. So we didn't have to think about copy editing or just kind of the regular production chain that follows a book from acquisition to publication. But certainly, what are we doing? I mean, we talked to so many booksellers. We talked to PGW. We had them along with us. We honestly, oh, this is recording, isn't it? We weren't going to do it. We didn't know if it was the right thing to do. The paperback is this beautiful book already, and y'all are selling. We didn't know. We just didn't know for a really long time if this was something that we should do. But we heard from bookseller after bookseller to do it. Like, don't be stupid, do it. So anyway, we've been having this conversation for a really long time. I don't think I'm answering your question very well. All I would say is that this book is really dear to us and dear to our book selling friends. And so we wanted to be, you know, we didn't know COVID was coming. We didn't know any of this was coming when we started planning. And the print run conversation, what did you say earlier? The witchy science. The print run conversation for us is always a witchy science. We never know how many books to print. We really don't. I mean, I don't mean to say it so simply, but it's true. And certainly for this title, we'll just keep an eagle eye on stock. And if y'all are loving it, we'll reprint it. And we'll reprint it again, and we'll reprint it again. I was, you know, in thinking about this question, I was thinking about World of Wonders too, which is another one of our big books for fall. Again, this is recording, so whatever. But we essentially had to go into a second reprinting before publication, before the book's pub date. So, you know, we could look at that and say, oops, we really fucked up. You know, that was a huge mistake on our end. But, and now we're in a third reprinting. So this is like, again, I'm not answering your question at all, but we have to be in tight communication with each other. Mm-hmm. We have to be in tight communication with PGW. We have to reach out to booksellers often and, you know, with a big heart. But maybe that's all I'll say before I ramble on forever. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
No, I think you did. I think you mentioned that you've been working on the Braiding Sweetgrass Special Edition for a long time. And another point that I think it's important to pick up on is that we are guessing which books are going to sell. And to me, at least, it's a small comfort to know that you're guessing too, that this is inexact for all of us. The challenge being, I don't know how much that helps the customer who's demanding this book right now because Mimi wants it for her birthday. So I suppose that the kind of dictum of good and clear communication, as always, extends to customers as well, not only between booksellers and publishers, but we have to figure out a way to explain this to the impatient customer.
Right.
I know that it's something we're always working on, especially at a time like this. All right, and
Well,
now Eric, or go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say super quickly, our strategy, and I'm sure this is not, this isn't rocket science by any means, but our strategy, so we're a nonprofit organization, right? Our bottom line is not solely on the profit of our books. So our strategy and our mission and how we talk about printing books at Milkweed in general is that it's the long life of the book.
Mm-hmm.
So we always keep books in stock. So we're watching our iPage account, and if it gets down to an uncomfortable amount, we don't sit and wait, we reprint it. Because it's not about who had the New York Times review and is that going to increase sales. Awesome, it should, and I want it to. But I'm just saying we don't like solely, our strategy is not solely to print based on the timeliness of a book.
Great, I'm glad to hear it, and keep up the good work. And Eric, $2 Radio recently published their first cookbook, which is another one of those fourth quarter red flags. The cookbooks can run into trouble. So tell us a little bit about your strategy for Q4 and making sure all your books are in a healthy flow to the bookstores.
Well, a year ago when we were planning this out, I'm still traumatized by 2008 and what happened then. We had just started working with a major distributor at that point, and we published a couple of books in the spring that sold like 3,000 or 4,000 copies, and we were like, yeah, publishing. And then the recession hit in the fall, and it just was a total kick in the pants. So I'm still shell shocked from that. And thinking about the presidential election this fall, in terms of our approach, I was thinking, doing something very literary and serious might not be what people are looking for during that period of time. And so we went with our more serious books earlier on in the year, and we had been kicking around these ideas for more humor-based projects for this fall during the election. And then obviously, everything was thrown for a loop with the pandemic and everything else. So that was our approach to this year. But in terms of how we're taking things, we have, I think that a lot of the sales reps that we work with, I think that the estimates are lower than what we would have hoped for in the past because of everything going on. But we're, passionate publishers and editors, and you really believe in projects. And so, we're still going with the quantities that we would typically do and just having more shipped to our offices and just keeping them in storage in hopes that we'll get to use them at some point. But like Anne and Jana both touched on, what's been tricky is also with some of those backlist titles, with print runs being more conservative. And then if you're looking to get something printed POD as sort of like a stopgap until you're able to get a more substantial run done, the wait time for that has been increased. So it's less of a stopgap measure, which has been kind of tricky with a few of our backlist titles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it's just that science of how to predict and what to know.
It's not science.
That's great. This is H. Melt just posted a question in the chat that I had on my mind. So thank you. I'm gonna just ask this, and we'll anyone can weigh in here. Any of the panelists. Again, this is a question that was very much on my mind. The message seems to be order big and order early, but during COVID, how feasible is that really for bookstores already struggling and running on a tight budget? Are publishers printing more or less? How are publishers and distributors preparing for that? In a normal year where we could bank on strong sales increases, order early and order a lot is no problem. But there's so many question marks in terms of what we can do in terms of cash flow. So do any of the panelists have thoughts about that? It's a really hard question.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And you know, Belt is very small. We are cash strapped. When you guys all closed down in March, April, May, you know, our cash stopped coming in too. And then our distributor is like, you need big print runs for the fall. And I'm like, but we have no money because it's been a terrible year so far with sales in terms of, you know, particularly March for us. And I know, I don't even know about you guys. I'm sure so much worse, but you know, March, April, June, and it's the payments that we get from those months that we would normally use for fall printing. So we are printing less because we have less, just like you guys. And you're gonna, you know, so yeah, it is ridiculous to say order a lot when you have been struggling. That makes no sense. I think we just all, you know, it's just like, we'll just see how it goes. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, I don't know if I mean, I would say order at your comfort level. I don't ever want to promote this idea that all bookstores follow one strategy. Everyone is, you know, individually dealing with their community needs and their regional needs and their staff needs, et cetera, et cetera. So I personally would never push the mantra to like order big and, you know, order. But again, I'm also coming from this perspective of being a nonprofit. So we, you know, again, just to like, you know, underline that financial aspect for Milkweed is that, again, the bottom line for us is not solely the sales of our books. We work with funders and, you know, obviously that side of our business changes a lot and the Trump administration has fucked that up, but we're still doing okay. And so I just want to say, like, I would order at your comfort level and also reach out to us individually if you're curious about what we're printing and how we're printing. Mm-hmm. For us at Milkweed, we're printing the same, not necessarily more, not necessarily less. Again, the World of Wonders example is kind of us printing in a similar mindset and then having to reprint again. But we're going to do it because we can, because we're a nonprofit. So I do want to say, I don't want to be like, yay, we can do it. It's so easy for us. Like I know that others are in different financial, you know, situations and we're aware of that. So, but I do want to kind of like throw out just an invitation to always reach out individually if you have questions or if you're struggling, or I'm happy to talk anytime. So.
Thank you.
Can I comment and say
Sure.
that the order big is not the suggestion as much as order what you know you could sell. How, you know, obviously the buying strategies are very different this year, or should be, from years past. And so the question is, what could you bring in that you're going to sell? So there's more thought to that. I also like, there was a comment by David that says that the flip side of ordering big is if you don't order as deep into the catalogs, you can keep your total buying budgets within reason. So there is strategy to all of this. And then also I like to mention, for those of you that use Ingram as your supplier, let's remember that they are indie friendly as well with something called the Vault. And when we are chiming into them about what we think they should be ordering, that becomes another location to make sure you could have what you need. So, you know, these are best practices. And of course, you know, I always end everything by saying, when in doubt, give your problem to your sales rep.
Thank you. I will say on the Ingram issue, with a couple people, just discussions with a few people have brought this up in the lead up to this panel. Sometimes on certain titles, it's impossible to order small if you're going through Ingram because they're designated as Street Smart Select and you're stuck with 20 of them. And I've been burned a couple times this fall already by a whole carton of books I didn't know. So that's just another factor to think about.
Danny, we had a question from Jamie
Sure.
Thomas from Women and Children a little bit further back in the chat, so I'm going to bring that to the front of the chat right now for you.
Oh, okay. This one from Jamie right here. Our store has shifted so much online business where customers are not shopping our front tables and are ordering really strange to us titles. I feel that too. Oh boy. We then have to find space to process all these online sales of relatively random titles. Does anyone have a good system for getting these front list orders in early, but then having somewhere to put the books when you're getting larger quantities of books instead of doing regular reorders throughout the season? This is for booksellers as much as the publishers. It's a tricky question. I think the question of space is a good one. In some ways, I can't speak to it because we're not open to customers, and so our entire sales floor is just a processing floor. That's another. I mean, I have placed some really big front list orders, and they're just going to be piles everywhere. So I think our new way of doing things and our new way of ordering is going to reshape the look of our stores in a way that might not be pleasant. Okay, so here is another question. This looks like this is from Gianna at Roadrunner Press. Are booksellers open in this unusual year to ordering direct from publishers for, say, a 50% discount? And how does paying for free shipping or for inventory, how does paying for free shipping for inventory come into the equation? I would say free freight is kind of a must for us at the Raven. And certainly extra discounts help incentivize ordering direct. I think that's pretty true across the board for booksellers. And another thing I'm always thinking about at the very least is minimums, because sometimes it can be hard to put together an order for 25 or 30 books, especially just because it takes time to run the report and figure out what we need from that publisher. But if anyone else wants to weigh in on that question, they can.
I'd like to share a perspective. One is that the terms matter as much as the discount for us. And if we can pay as late as possible, that matters. But I think the more important thing is the amount of work that goes into having separate accounts is an important factor. So anytime we're doing one-offs, we always are thinking about how much follow-up and diligence it'll require. And that's a critical part for us. The deterrent for having one-offs.
Mm-hmm. That's Jeff Deutsch from Seminary Co-op and 57th Street Books in Chicago. Thank you, Jeff. And we've got some more booksellers weighing in on that question in the chat. Let me see. I had another question for the publishers. But again, while I try to think of this, I encourage people to weigh in the chat with questions for our esteemed publishing panel. Let's see here. Oh, okay. So I was just thinking about other strategies. This is, John Mesjak said this in the chat. I wanted to call this out. I think one broad answer to A.H. Melt's question, which was about it being difficult to order big when cash is tight, is that this fall's supply chain problems are being telegraphed plenty early. Big books are probably going to be hard to come by at some point this season. Prep your staff to be able to hand sell flexibly with lots of fallback options for when specific books are briefly unavailable. I think during that Michelle Obama winter, we all had a couple backups to offer to people for when that book was out. Another thing we're doing at the Raven is mystery boxes are great. We're going to restart a push for our book bundles. As a Christmas present, we sell mystery boxes for $50 and $100. And that's a great way to get back stock or books you do have a lot of copies of into people's hands. So this is an interesting question though. And the Raven has tried to start communicating this idea of shopping early and beginning the difficult work of making our customers have feelings about the supply chain, which is required for them to work with us on getting their orders in early to us. are any of the publishers working on messaging about this kind of public-facing messaging? Are you also communicating that the supply chain is going to be difficult, or is this something that's not part of your communication strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't articulated specifically the supply chain is going to be difficult, so order early. But we have become, frankly, even before COVID, et cetera, more intentional in our pre-order messaging and in partnering with independent bookstores and do funnel sales that way. I think a lot of this has to do with, I mean, your question for me is, the crux of it is like how to educate folks on buying books now, generally. How do we create a habitual buying pattern in people's lives? And so, yeah, to jump in quickly, no, Milkweed hasn't specifically said, you know, we shared the New York Times piece, and there's a little bit of education around that happening, but we certainly haven't specifically said supply chain or used that terminology. Just trying to encourage people to look into their favorite local bookstore, sharing links. Yeah.
Well, Jana, actually, PGW has been doing that on your behalf. So one of the things that we've been doing at IPS PGW is making sure that as we are watching stock levels, that we are letting you accounts know that and sending a spreadsheet with our anticipated stock levels and then when reprints are coming in. So I think most of the publishers are trying to get there. It's kind of one of these situations. When I was a baby bookseller 30 years ago, people were moving away from build up buy, and they're doing just in time. And now we're having to sort of go back to the old school way of doing it 30 years ago. So I think that takes some time for people to relearn those old traditions and habits.
Hi, Johanna.
That was Joanna Hines from Ingram. Thank you for sharing that. So this is, Johanna mentioned data that the distributors are sharing with the publishers. A question for the publishers: if I'm a bookseller watching a pile of books quickly diminish in my store, and I email you, the publisher, saying, hey, what's the reprint plans for this book? What should I do? Do you welcome that kind of question from us?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Definitely.
Good. I kind of knew that was the answer, but I wanted to make a point that it's always cool to email your sales reps or folks you know at the publishers to be in communication with them. And again, I think we've all had the moments of frustration with this stuff in December, and perhaps one way to curb that just a little bit is to be in better communication and to have a little bit more data and a little bit less to guess about. Carrie posted in the chat a little bit more on this subject. The panel, Front List Buying in Uncertain Times, includes some great tips for 2020 ordering strategies. The link for that is in the chat. Which Christian from Workman says was a very helpful and fantastic session. Okay, I'll again reiterate that questions are welcome in the chat. Another point from I'm sorry I keep returning to this subject. Oh, I'm not sorry, because I think it's really interesting and really important. A follow-up on the ordering big titles discussion from H. Melt. The other problem with order big titles in big quantities is it makes indie stores identical rather than the curated spaces customers expect. We create a holiday hand sell list as a staff across our categories, which really helps. So you could, I think it's a really smart idea to, especially if the titles that everyone is asking for are getting hard to get, to focus on the books that are unique to you, that fit your store's voice, your community's unique needs, local authors, local stories, kind of off the beaten path books. We all have them. Focus on those because those books might not be facing the same supply chain issues that the blockbusters do. Okay, we're winding down on time here. We've got about 10 minutes left. Again, if you have any last minute questions, please type them into the chat. But I think I want to go around the panel one more time and just, this might reiterate things a little bit, but if each of our panelists could just share one thing from your perspective that you want booksellers to know or remember going into the 2020 holidays. This is a chance to talk to a lot of booksellers, again, about a challenging topic. What's one takeaway you'd share with our large audience of booksellers here? We'll start with Anne.
I just can't imagine how hard it's all been for you guys. I mean, we are in the book, we're both sides are doing the same thing on some level, but we publishers are not open to the public and did not have to deal with so much that you guys have had to struggle with since COVID. And I'm just incredibly impressed at what all of you are doing. That's really all I have to say. It's just like, I'm so sorry. It must be so hard. And I'm really impressed.
Thank you. Karen.
Well, I would echo Anne that, it's a hard job. And I think for me, the takeaway for what I've learned about COVID is that communication is essential. You cannot over-communicate during this time. The takeaway is a suggestion for booksellers to read their email and be in contact with their sales rep if possible. These are where I found probably the greatest walls, and it wasn't for lack of understanding, just wanting to continuously offer a message of hope. But there has to be some form of being able to respond back. And so whether it's the phone or email or a chat, there has to be a communication that works both ways. But for myself, and regardless of who is answering or not, I've learned to over-communicate, which I will continue to do.
Thank you, Karen. Jana.
I'm just gonna highlight kind of the human end of things and piggyback a little bit off of Karen here. I hope that folks feel open to communicating directly with us. I'd love to hear from you if I love hearing this, it's of, hey, we still want to make our store hyper curated to our region, to our audience, to our readers, to what we know our neighborhood loves. If you want to brainstorm any back, we have digital content we can share. We have reading guides. We have other pieces of content. We know these authors really, really sometimes too much, and so we can provide you with selling points. Also events, I know we didn't talk about events at all because that's like a whole other, there have been many conversations about events, but certainly our authors who are sitting at home and and I know there's a big question mark of how our sales going with digital events, and are people tired, and et cetera, et cetera. The communication and the human level of it. We want to help you out in every way we can. That's what I'll say. Yeah.
Thank you. And Eric.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many good messages in this past closing moment, but definitely this whole idea and mentality and approach that we're just all in this together, and we're totally open to being transparent. We have a bookshop too, and I totally understand that our orders are down and in terms of what we're carrying. And another thing that we found that's been kind of tricky is just messaging in terms of with all the publicity that new startup websites like Bookshop have been presenting themselves to the public. That has been really tricky and kind of presenting some misconceptions for our community here. But definitely overall, just we're all in it together, and hope you guys, are surviving and thriving and looking forward to a solid holiday season.
Thank you, Eric. And I can't wait to see you accept the Voice of the Heartland Award in a couple weeks.
Thanks, Danny. Appreciate it.
Okay, so before I kind of wrap things up, I will mention, I'm not sure we even have time to get into this, unfortunately, but Rebecca George in the chat says, has Ingram had any communication about Indie Vault for the holidays? Bigger numbers there. My concern is Amazon zapping up everything that starts moving at all due to printing issues. A really valid question from Rebecca. So I don't know if someone from Ingram wants, we don't have anyone from Ingram on the panel right now. So I don't know if we have anyone to speak to that, but it's a valid question, and perhaps someone can email Rebecca, or Rebecca can email the Ingram sales rep. I think the question of where reprints go when they happen is important. We value Ingram's efforts to make sure copies are set aside for indie bookstores, and I hope that program remains robust this year. Okie doke. So I want to just kind of tie up to pull what I hear as some kind of main themes here before we all go and keep doing the hard and difficult work of getting ready for the fourth quarter. I think we've heard people touch on communication in a lot of different ways, communicating with the publishers, and especially communicating with your customers. This is all difficult stuff. We've had a really productive discussion about it over the last hour and over the last couple months as an industry, but the customers need to make sure to hear this really clearly from you. And you can have a grasp of what's going on with the supply chain, but we also need to make sure that the customer who's looking for a book that's not there is also privy to what's going on. Using data as much as you can, as much as it pains us to think about books as commodities, it can be helpful in getting accurate orders in on time. All of the publishers mentioned that we're all humans. We're all guessing at this. We all have the same goal of making sure everybody has the book they want when they want it. And then also, I would say one thing I took away that I hadn't even thought about is, instead of preparing for certain big titles to be out of stock, make sure your store has enough of what makes your store unique. And even if certain blockbuster titles aren't in stock, making sure what's on your shelves reflects your store's voice, and what you do best for your community. So those are my takeaways. I used to be a high school teacher, so I think I can't resist the impulse to tie things up at the end of the hour. I will say, Joanna on the Ingram question said, I can't speak for the wholesale side of Ingram, but IPS, PGW, and Two Rivers has significantly increased titles in Indie Vault from our publishers, and we'll be using the Vault for our publishers aggressively, and we appreciate that. Okay, I think that's all I've got. Thank you to Eric Obenauf from $2 Radio, Jana Demkevich from Milkweed, Anne Trubek from Belt, and Karen Torres from Hachette. I don't know if Larry wants to come back on and tie things up and do some housekeeping or what, but I think that's all I've got.
No, you covered everything. That was fantastic, Danny. I mentioned it earlier in the chat, but I think this conversation really humanized such a very complicated issue that across publishers and bookstores. So this was great. I do want to quickly mention there's a lot of great info in the chat. So the chat log. So if you want to save that file, if you open up the chat, there's 3 little dots. Click on that and click Save Chat. I'm also going to download it and upload it to the Heartland Fall Forum website, and then look for this recording this Friday. Thanks again, Danny, and everybody.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, everyone. This was fun.
Yes.
I miss you all.
Bye.